As I said, I extend my deepest sympathies to all those mourning the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, particularly Princess Anne, whose haunted face I saw in the back of the limousine in Scotland today with the coffin leaving for a long way to London. She will lie in state, Her Majesty, in Edinburgh. The people of Scotland, in their tens of thousands, have turned out to wave their goodbyes to the departed monarch in a way that probably means the end of the separatist menace, at least for now, in Scotland in the Union affairs. Princess Anne would be my pick if I were to choose the Queen's successor. If there was a vote on who should be the monarch, Princess Anne would win it in my book every day of the week. But I extend my sympathies to the undoubted millions of British people who are sad and who are mourning, grieving the passing of someone of enormous significance in the life of almost everybody in this country. All of my entire life, and I'm not young, she has been the Queen, the backdrop, the green screen in front of which everything else happened. Governments came and went. Prime ministers rose and fall. Wars were fought. Ironically, in her name, though she had no say whatsoever on whether those wars should be fought and when, if ever, they should be ended. As the Netflix series The Crown shows, it is the history of almost all of our lives, and so significant, therefore, it is. And for most of us, we've never been present at a changing of the guard like this. We've never seen one monarch die and another emerge instantaneously by divine right as the new monarch, in this case, the new King Charles III. I must say, I thought he would have gone for George VII, as he was entitled to do, because I, if not he, am mindful of what happened to King Charles I. I have never at any time, disrespected the person of the late Queen Elizabeth. I met her twice. I served her twice. First as a wine waiter in the Angus Hotel in Dundee in the 1970s, when I literally served her. I told her later on the second occasion that I met her in Buckingham Palace, "Your Majesty, you posed me one of the greatest dilemmas of my then young life." "How so?" she asked. "Well, when I asked you if you wanted red or white, you answered, 'Yes, please,' causing great consternation, even panic in my breast. So I poured white, which she later agreed was the correct thing to do in the circumstances. I served her in Parliament. For almost 30 years, I was a member of what is known as Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition, though it has never been as loyal an opposition as it is today. Sir Keir Starmer, a former Trotskyite, a former Republican campaigner for the overthrow of the monarchy, has turned out to be more royal than the king, more Catholic than the Pope. Not that you can be a Catholic around their circles. Reminding everyone yesterday at the Ascension ceremony, the anti-Catholic bigotry that is baked in to the British Constitution. All these members of the Privy Council, including Nicola Sturgeon, and to my astonishment, Alex Salmond, turned up for the Privy Council to acclaim the King and the Union and to sign a document, an oath, that they would fight to preserve the supremacy of the Protestant faith in Britain. I don't know how that will go down. at Celtic Park amongst the new Scottish nationalists, hundreds of thousands of them, Roman Catholics to a man and woman, who follow Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon wherever they want them to go. We've never seen this before, so it is of importance. And it was right that it was marked by the state with flags at half-mast, with the closure of schools and everything else on the day of the funeral. But certain anomalies quickly emerged. All of the football program, on which millions of us, including me, depend as we depend upon our food and water, was cancelled by fiat, by the football authorities, at least to please the state, if not at the direction of the state. But rugby went ahead. Cricket went ahead. Horse racing went ahead. Now, what might be, you may be asking, the difference between these sports? The answer is obvious. Football is the mass working class sport, where every Saturday, on Sunday sometimes, on Fridays and Mondays sometimes, on Wednesdays sometimes, on Thursdays sometimes, millions of British people, millions of them, gather in a crowd being the operative word, where they are free to shout, to sing, to boo to their heart's content. And the British ruling class did not trust the British working class en masse in football stadia not to rain on their parade. Not that there would have been many, in my opinion, amongst those crowds who would have disrespected the Queen. But the establishment in Britain is nervous. These are febrile times. We have a feeble Prime Minister, an even more feeble leader of the opposition, a new king in an economic crisis when the country is at war, economic war for now, but perhaps on the verge of a real shooting war. The loyalty of all of the British people cannot be taken for granted on all of those fronts. I'm sorry that the Queen has gone for many reasons, but the preeminent of them is that we now have King Charles as the unelected head of state in Britain. We have an unelected House of Lords, an unelected Prime Minister in the House of Commons, and now we have an unelected head of state in the form of King Charles. And I've got some news for some of you that you're not going to like. You're not going to like this King Charles. The Brexiteers amongst you are not going to like this King Charles. The libertarians amongst you are not going to like this King Charles with his buddy Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. You're not going to like this King Charles with all his quackery and greenery, his devotion to zero-sum climate change economics. You're not going to like this King Charles with his attitude to women, most visibly, vividly remembered in the tragic circumstances of the late Princess Diana. You're not going to like this Queen Consort, because every time you look at her, you're going to remember how Diana was driven to an early grave by the disgraceful behavior of this now King Charles and this now Queen Consort. You're not going to like this King Charles's political activism. Don't imagine He'll be the restrained, behind the scenes, quiet word in the ear monarch that Queen Elizabeth was. He'll be out there publicly campaigning for the things that he supports, which happen to be things which most of us don't support. And it has begun already. He's making a tour of the realm. Good luck to him. He's finally got a job at 73. Who's he taking with him? The Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, Liz Truss. So much for political neutrality. The Prime Minister is going to wrap herself in right royal robes, at the end of which, mark my words, she'll call a general election by Christmas. And she will bathe in such light as there currently is around the new King Charles. But it won't last. That light will die. That light will die because the essential character of King Charles will quite quickly become visible to everyone. When he tells you that you will own nothing, though he will own plenty, he's now the richest man in the world. Every penny of the wealth of Her Majesty the Queen, the richest woman in the world, has passed to him without a penny of taxation involved. You'll be poor, but you will be happy. You will own nothing, though he will own everything. But you will be happy. And you'll be forced by digital rationing to restrict your driving, to restrict the temperature of your homes, perhaps even how often you may turn on the light. He'll tell you that you have to pay the price of hunger, of cold, of economic collapse, as I said earlier, so that we can be sure that Izium and Balaklia remain in a country called Ukraine rather than in a country called Russia. Let me turn to that. Because, as I said, the lights have gone out. After 6 months in which only 125,000 of the Russian armed forces have been fighting a war with one hand tied behind their back in Ukraine, with velvet gloves on. 125,000 out of an active duty military of 1.25 million. 1/10 of the armed forces of Russia have been deployed in Ukraine. After 6 months of that, following breakthroughs by the NATO armies of the Ukrainian armed forces and their mercenaries, deploying their weaponry and training from NATO for these last 6 months, Russia has decided to get tough and has this evening knocked out every power plant in Ukraine. Henceforth, whatever is done in Ukraine will be done by darkness and by cold. Reinforcements are being rushed to the front. Russia will, I'm sure, begin a call-up to ensure that the reserve is not left denuded by the transfer of forces. This war in Ukraine just got a whole lot uglier. This war that never needed to be fought, which could have been avoided if France and Germany, as the guarantors of the Minsk II agreements, had lived up to their signatures and implemented that agreement which they guaranteed. This war is about to get very much bloodier. And not just on the battlefield, though on the battlefield, where everyone is fighting to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, it will be the ugliest of all. across Europe. And I believe we'll hear from Professor Wolf later, in North America too, the economic carnage which is coming our way down the pipeline, if you'll forgive the pun, will be absolutely devastating to the economies and thus the societies of your country and mine. Don't think this war can be restricted to dead Ukrainians in Izium or Balaklia. It cannot. It's going to shut your factory. It's going to freeze your home. It's going to leave your children hungry. It's going to leave you unemployed. It's going to leave you penniless. And you need to ask yourselves, if the political class that rule you and me are up to the challenge that I have just described, with a new Prime Minister and with a new King, Britain surely isn't. This is an existential moment for Britain. It is perfectly possible that the old order will not survive the coming weeks, months, and years. The old world cannot continue. The new world is not yet ready to be born. These are troubled and troubling times, the more so as Queen Elizabeth II is no longer there behind us on our personal green screens. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be the mother of all talk shows.